Okay, so in this stock valuation, in the beginning, we will have a look some basic informations about stock. This topic is about stock valuation, but in the beginning of session, we will have a look something because stock means equity. So we will look some other financial instruments that comes from the debts, like as bonds, right? Like as bank loans, right? So in the beginning, we will have a look something about bonds or the liabilities, and then later on we will move on to the stock. But this topic is all about stocks. But in the beginning, we will look something about debts in order to understand the difference between equity and the debts, right? So let's start. And at the end of this session, we will do some calculation of the common stock. So, but 80% of this topic is about theory, about the concepts, about stocks and types of stocks and so on. And 20% is about the estimation or the find the value of the stock. So that's why this the title of this this topic is a stock valuation, right? So let's start with the first learning outcome. So the first is debts and equity. Debts and equity, right? Or equities. Debts and equities, right? So now, what is the difference between debts and equity? So we're going to find the difference first. In order to understand the difference, we need to know what is the meaning of debt and what is the meaning of equity. Debts means something which is which belongs to the fixed schedule payments. Something is a fixed periodic payments known as a debts, right? That's always fixed, right? So whatever payments we're going to make, it either interest that we borrow from bank or interest that belongs to the bond or other debt financial instruments, right? Or debts capital. So that's debts, which is fixed, right? And equity basically are payments which subject to firm financial performance, right? So equity is a payment subject to firm's financial performance. Firm financial performance. Firm financial performance means whatever payments which relate to the equity, like as dividend, which is the best example. So company pay dividend as per the firm performance. Remember last time when I show you the one cartoon about oil and drum manufacturing companies, the guy he goes to New York Stock Exchange to get listed of his company. In that video, I hope you remember that the guy, he tried to negotiate with the shareholders. So which means the board of directors, they try to negotiate with the shareholders regarding the dividend payments, right? Why they are negotiating? The reason of the negotiating is a firm performance, right? As company is performing goods, may company will pay a high dividend to shareholders, or may company keep dividends, all right, and then company will reinvest their dividend that will increase the future dividend payments for shareholders. All right, so the idea is that any kinds of payments which belongs to equity is mainly belongs to the firm performance, right? As company is doing good, company more likely to pay dividends, or shareholders more likely to get more rewards from the company in form of dividend, right? So that's the difference between uh, between debt and equity, right? So now let's find the difference. So we're gonna look at some 5 or 6 different points. These points will help us to get the clear view about company about the company debts, about the difference between company debts and the equity. So let's talk about the difference. Difference between debts and equity. So here I will show you here debts. Here I'm going to write debts, and here I'm going to write equity. So here is the difference. Okay, so debts known as accounts payable. Debts known as accounts payable. What does it mean, accounts payable? Accounts payable means the people to whom we have to pay money back. So we have obligations to return money back to the people. So those people call accounts payable. And you know that in debts, we borrow money. That's where debts become a liability, which means we are liable, or we have obligations to return money back to those people. That's the reason debts known as accounts payable, right? The money we get it from the debts, that's called accounts payable, known as liability. It's treated as a liability that you studied before in your financial accounting or other accounting subjects, so principle of accounting. And equity known as a ownership. So what does it mean? It means the people who are providing money to the company, those people will become an owner of the company. So that's why the money which comes from the equity, that money known as the ownership, right? Because these people will control the company as the shareholders, right? And accounts payable as a debts holder or banks, right? So that's why the money comes from debts known as accounts payable, or the people who providing money to the company, or company borrow money from the people, that's people known as accounts payable, right? And on the equity side, the people who are providing money in exchange, they are buying the shares. So those people known as the owner of the company, right? Second is no voting rights. You know voting rights? Anybody knows voting rights? Yes or no? Do you know what? Okay, no, you don't know voting rights. Okay, so remember last time I explained you about the structure of company, right? What is the structure of company? So of course we have a founder, remember? And once we got founder, then we have shareholders, right? So it means we need a capital, all right? So capital, money comes from equity, right? Money comes from equity, and money also come from debts, equity and debts. So we got finance, we got capital, right? And then we have board of directors, all right? And after board of directors, we have a CEO, right? Or director or managing director or vice president, whatever you want to call it. Okay. Now the idea is, what is voting rights? Voting rights means in the board of directors. Board of directors are a group of people, right? These are the group of people. In this group of people, we gonna elect one person, right? We gonna elect a one person, and that this person will become a CEO, right? So now the question is, who gonna select this person? This person mainly selected by shareholders, right? Shareholders. So shareholders, they will vote. You know vote? You know what is the meaning of, you know what is vote? Yes or no? Do you know what? Yes, okay. So these shareholders, they're gonna vote to someone in these people. And the person who got a maximum votes, that person will become a CEO. That's the whole story about voting, all right? So the idea is debts. Debts means maybe a bondholder who hold the bonds, or maybe banks. So these are the debt holders, right? Idea is debt holders are not allowed to vote. So idea is, when we are voting to select a CEO or the director of company, only shareholders, they have right to vote. Debts, they don't have any kinds of vote to select CEO from the board of directors, right? So that's the meaning of no voting rights. So debts holder, they don't have a voting rights, right? They do not have any kinds of voting rights to select a CEO. But on the other hand, equity, they have voting rights. Equities, they have a voting right. So that's the difference between no voting rights, which is debts, and voting rights, which come from the equity. The shareholders, they have a right to select, but debts, they don't have any kinds of, they don't have any rights to select, right? Next is a primary claims. Primary claims. And this is a secondary claim. Now, what does it mean, primary claims and secondary claims? You know that, so let me explain here. Okay. Okay. So, you know, we have sales minus cost of goods sold is a gross profit or gross loss, minus operating cost. Operating cost means marketing, advertising, so on. So gross profit minus operating cost is a net profit, or we call it operating profit. So better I say operating profit. We got operating profit. So for example, profit, not loss. So from this operating, from this operating profit, we gonna minus some non-operating cost. Non-operating cost is any kinds of cost which is not relate to the company marketing, production, or selling products, like as minus interest. We minus interest, then we minus tax, and then we minus dividend. All right, and then we got net profit or net loss, whatever. Let's assume profit, right? So these kinds of cost known as non-operating cost. Non-operating cost, right? So remember, when company has an operating profit, first of all, company will pay interest. Interest means which belongs to debt holders, right? Debts, because let's say bonds, we have to pay interest. When we borrow from bank loan, we have to pay interest. Then number two is a tax, right, which belongs to government. We have to pay to government, right? And now we got dividend. Dividend means something belongs to shareholders. Shareholders means equity, right? Shareholders means equity. So the idea is, when it's time to pay money, who will receive money first? Who has a primary claims to get money? Primary claims. Who has primary claims? Of course, debts holder. So that's why I'm writing here primary claims, which belongs to debts. And now, once we paid debts, then we're gonna pay to shareholder. Of course, after government, I ignore government here because we are not raising any money from governments, right? We're raising money from debts, so we are paying interest, or we're raising money from equity, so we are paying a dividend, right? So then shareholders, they're gonna have a secondary claims. Secondary claims means they will receive money later. Primary claim means they receive money first. Compared to shareholders, debts holder, they receive money first, right? And secondary claims means whatever money left, or after making a payments to interest or maybe tax, just ignore the tax because we focus more on the finance options. So after paying all the money to the debts holder, whatever is left, so that's money we use it to pay for shareholders. So that's why we call it secondary claims. All right, did you understand? Yes or no? Did you understand the difference between primary claims and secondary claims? Okay. So let's move on to the next. The third one is a less risk or less risky, and this one more risky. Now, less risky from debts holder point of view, not from company point of view, and more risky, of course, again from the shareholders point of view. Why debt holders are less risky, less chance to lose money, and equity, they have more chance to lose money? So the reason is, first of all, the primary and secondary claims. So debt holder, they always receive money first. So after paying to debt holders, if nothing left, equities or shareholders, they're not gonna get anything, all right? So that's the reason Debts holder, they receive money first, so they are less risky. And probability to receive, I mean, high probability to not to receive money uh, uh, for the equities. Why? Because if nothing left after making a payments to debts, so equities, they will lose their money. All right, so that's why debts holder, their investment is a less risky, and equity, their investment is a more risky. Another way to understand if the debts, if you take example of banks, when bank lend us money, bank want us to mortgage. Remember mortgage? They want us to give assets to them, pledging the assets or collateral the assets. So we if you want to borrow money from bank, we have to mortgage the assets. Why we have to mortgage? Because if we're not going to return money back to bank, bank will keep the assets. All right, so bank has a win-win situation, so there's no any chance to lose money. If I return money back to bank, that's fine, bank got money. If I do not return money back to bank, bank take a control or take a possession on my assets, so bank got money. So means bank have a no lose situation. But for equity is win or lose situation. All right, if company making money, they receive dividend, all right, or they receive return. If company is bankrupt or company having a loss or company have another kinds of financial obstacles, then company cannot pay money to the equities, but they don't have anything as a security, so they're not going to get money or they lose their money. Right, so that's why equity known as more risky and debts known as a less risky. Make sure debts point of view, not from company point of view. Right. Next is a maturity dates. Maturity dates. No maturity dates. I think it's really easier for you to understand maturity and non-maturity dates because we study about annuity and perpetuity. All right. So no maturity dates is a perpetuity. Why? Because under perpetuity there is no any time frame. There is no any particular period in a perpetuity. But on the other hand, in annuity we have a annual periodic payments. So means time to time we have to make return money back. So that's why debts are known as annuity. So I can write down here annuity because they are associated with the maturity dates. When maturity dates come, we have to return back to the debts holder. But equity, there is a perpetuity. So there is no any particular time, just cash flows and the rate of return. So that's why cash flow divided by rate of return that we studied before. All right. And the last I'm writing here is so debts and equity, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here is a 6. So the last difference between debts and equity, it's a tax advantage. Tax advantage. Holding a debts will give you tax advantage, but holding an equity, we have no tax advantage. Holding a equity will not give us any kinds of tax advantage. So we can see here, we can see in this example, you can see in this example, you can see that interest here, interest, and here is a dividend, right? So remember, if you borrow more money, you borrow more, your interest payment will increase, right? Your interest payments increase, your profit will reduce. So let's say my operating profit is 7, right? Operating profit is 7 and my interest is 3, right? So 7 minus 3, 4. And I will pay tax on this 4. So for example, tax is maybe $1. So let's say $1. I mean, we will pay tax on this $4. All right. So let's say it's a 25%. Right. So it's $1. Right. So now 3, and then I will pay dividend from this 3. Right. So for example, I borrow more debts. So my interest increase. So interest increase, let's say 4, 3, all right? So 25% idea is that if my profit decrease, my tax will be decreased because I'm paying tax on my profit, all right? So that's why debts will give us interest. Okay, so I repeat again the sixth difference, which is about tax advantage. Tax advantage. So debts and equity. So debts give us, yes, we have a tax advantage, but holding an equity, we do not have any tax advantage. As I mentioned that 7 minus 3 is 4. Let's say 25% is 1, it's 3, and then we will pay dividend, right? So this is interest, right? This is tax, which is 25%, and this is dividend, right? So interest, tax, dividend. So for example, if my debts increase, so debts increase, my interest also increase. So let's say debts increase, so my interest increase. So before it was 3, now it's get 4. So 3, and 25% of this 3 is, right? So you can see here I'm paying tax 1, and here I'm paying less than 1. All right. So that's why if you have debts, you have a tax benefits, you are paying low tax. But if you have equity, equity means dividend. So you can see we already pay tax. We already pay tax, right? So it doesn't matter you pay high dividend or low dividend, your tax payments will not be affected at all right? So that's why having a debts is giving you tax benefits. We also call it tax shields. And equity, having equity, we will not have any kinds of tax advantage. Right? So that's the difference between debts and equity in form of tax advantage, right? Is it okay? Yes or no? Is it clear? All right. So let's move on to the next. So that's all about the difference between debts and equity, right? So debts and equity is finished. So now we will not discuss about debts anymore. Whatever we're going to study now is only about equity. So we will study equity in very detail, right? So next is equity. Equities. Now, you know equity. Equity means shares, right? Money come from selling shares. That's called equity. Or equity means uh, uh, equity means ownership. Or there is one more word we use it for equity. That word called a residual interest. Now, what does it mean, residual interest? Interest doesn't mean that interest that belongs to debts. No, it's not that interest. It's a different interest. What does it mean, residual interest? Residual means something which is left over. Something is left over, or something which is left, that's called residual, right? Residual interest, equity. Equity means, of course, shares or shareholders. Shareholders, they have a residual interest. So which means whatever is left in company, that belongs to shareholder. So you can see that we will pay interest, then we pay tax. After paying a tax, whatever money left, that's money known as residual interest. That's known as residual interest. Right? Residual interest. I will explain you this residual interest later in more detail. All right. So not exactly whatever is left that belongs to shareholders, because when you study about the types of shareholders, because in equity, you're going to learn about the types of shareholders. So when you study about the types of shareholders, then you understand exactly what is the meaning of a residual interest. Then I will explain you residual interest. All right, but for just now point of view, for this moment, keep in your mind that equity means ownership. All right, because as I mentioned before, the difference between debts and equity, they're going to control the business. Second thing is they're also known as residual interest, because after paying all the kinds of expenses, whatever money is left, that money eventually belongs to the shareholders, because that's shareholders' money, right? Okay, so let's talk about equity. Equity means share. Now, share means maybe shareholders, right? Anybody has any question? Any question, yes or no? Okay. So now talk about shares. We have two types of shares. Two types of shares or two types of shareholders, same thing. One is a preference shares and common shares. So preference shares and common share. Have you ever studied about these types of shares before in any other subject? Types of shares? Have you studied this one before? Types of shares? Okay. So now preference shares and common shares. So we will study about preference shares first. What is the meaning of preference shares? Preference shares are the shares on which shareholders, if you hold preference shares, you become a preference shareholders, right? So preference shares are those shares on which company pay fixed periodic dividend, right? Company pay fixed periodic dividend. So what does it mean? It means if you are holding a preference shares and you become a preference shareholders, doesn't matter company has high profit, low profit, or no profit, you will receive a fixed dividend, right? Company making a lot of money, you will not receive a high dividend. You will receive a same amounts of dividend time to time, no matter company financial performance is good or bad. This is very easiest way to understand preference shares, right? However, common shares, the meaning of common share, meaning of common share means common shares basically hold by common shareholders, and common shareholders known as a real controller of the company, all right? So the people who hold common shareholders, common shares, they are the real controller of the company, right? Real controller. What does it mean, real controller? Controller means they are involved in a decision making about company operating activities, company operating decisions, and financial decisions. All kinds of operating and financial decisions all kinds of operating and financial decisions will be taken by real controller. Now, what does it mean operating? Operating means something belongs to product and services, right? If company planning to make a new product, company has to discuss or company has to make approval from shareholders. Why? Because company has to convince them that whatever product we're gonna make it and we launch in a market, this product gonna be successful and we're gonna make a lot of money. Technically, shareholders or common shareholders will make a lot of money, right? So you have to convince them. If they are convinced, then you can produce a new product and you launch that new product in the markets, right? So if shareholders, they will say, no, I think this product doesn't have any potentials to win the markets or to compete the competitors, they will say no to the product. So the idea is that board of directors or the CEO of the company, he or she cannot just simply make decision by him or herself that we will make this product and we sell this product. They have to make approval from the common shareholders. So that's why we call them controllers. So this is called operating decisions about product and services. Now, financial decisions. Financial decision, of course, is a combination of debts and equity, right? If company planning to sell bonds or company gonna borrow money from bank, they have to discuss this decision with common shareholders. Why? Because if company debts are increasing over the period, this is kind of a bad signals over the company from over the company's financial performance. All right, so which means company debts are increasing over the period. So in future, company ability may reduce to return too much money back to the debts holders. All right, so that's why you have to make approval if you are planning to increase your debts by borrowing money from debt holders. Or if you're planning to sell new share in a markets, which is about equity, again, you have to take permission or approval from, you have to make approval from common shareholders. All right, so that's the meaning of operating and financial decisions. So they are involved in making operating and financial decision. Common shareholders. Preference shareholders, they are not involved any kinds of operating or financial decision. Company may not ask them. If company asks them, they can give their opinion if they want. But if company do not, if company do not want, they don't have to give any kinds of opinion to company. So company normally doesn't ask, right? So that's the difference, the major difference between preference shareholders and common shareholders, right? So as I said, controller, because they are involved in operating or financial decision. Why? Because this operating and financial decision will affect company performance, firm's performance. It will affect firm performance. If firm is performing negatively, they will lose their money. Lose their money means they lose their return, they lose their dividend. But preference shareholders will not lose anything because they will receive a fixed schedule payment. Doesn't matter company doing good or bad. So idea is that common shareholders return subject to firm performance. All right. Common shareholders return subject to firm performance. All right. Firm performance again depends upon company operating and financial policies of the company, and then company will perform accordingly. Right. So that's the difference. So conclusion is, preference shareholder, they receive a fixed dividend, and common shareholders, they may not receive fixed dividend. It depends upon company performance, company doing good or company doing bad. Why? Because they are the real boss. They are the real controller of the company, right? So that's the ideas for the difference between preference and the common shareholders. Right? Is it okay? Is it clear? Yes or no? Any questions? If anything is unclear to find the difference between, okay. So let's move on. Now we will study about what are the characteristics of preference shares, or the types of preference shares. So better I say types of preference shares, right? And second thing is rights. What rights preference shareholders they have, right? What rights they normally have. So let's talk about the um, the rights of preference shareholders. Rights. What rights they have? First rights, right to receive a primary claims, then common shareholders. Common shareholders. Remember, so let me go back to the previous one. Right. So now let me explain you more detail about this kinds of this structure to find the profit. Right. Right. So we have tax and minus dividend minus preference dividend, preference share dividend. Then we got net income, and then minus common share dividend, right? Then you got retained earning. Retained earning means after paying all kinds of dividend, whatever is left at the end of the company. So company will reinvest for, or company keep that money for any kinds of future investment, right? So retained earnings, right? Retained earnings. Okay. So now we are not talking about interest and tax here. So after interest and tax, we have a dividend. Interest, tax, and dividend. So dividend, I will write here C, A, B, and C. C1 and C2. So C1 means when company gonna pay dividend, preference shareholders, they have a primary claims. Primary claims, remember, over dividend. Not primary claims over any kinds of payment. Interest has a primary claims. Primary claims over payment. When company gonna pay, company will pay to debts first. But when company gonna pay dividend, then preference shareholders, they will receive dividend first. And common shareholders, they have a secondary claims, right? Primary claims and secondary claims. So idea is that preference dividend or preference shareholders, they have a primary claims over the dividend, and common shareholders, they have a secondary claims over the dividend. So means common shareholders, they always receive dividend after preference shareholders dividend payments. All right. So as you can see, the name preference. Preference means priorities, giving them first chance, right, to get money, right? So that's the meaning of preference. So we always give preference to preference shareholders in terms of dividend, and then common, right? So that's the meaning of primary claims, then common shareholders. So primary claims over dividend. Let me write it clear. Primary claims over dividend. dividend payments. Right. Primary claims over dividend payments. Second right is they have voting rights. Remember when I explain you about the difference between debts and equity, and I mentioned that debts, they don't have any voting rights. Equity, they have voting rights. Equity have voting rights means preference shareholders, they have voting rights, and common shareholders have voting rights. But the voting rights for preference shareholders are different than common shareholders voting rights. Right? So let me explain you. Let me explain you here. So we are talking about now voting rights. Voting rights. Now, preference shareholders, and common shareholders, right? Preference shareholders, of course, they have voting rights, but they have one voting rights. They have right to vote only one. And they have a multiple voting rights. They can do multiple votings. Now, what does it mean? For example, these are this is preference shareholders, and this is a common shareholders, right? This common shareholder is holding three common shares, and this preference shareholders also holding 3 shares. All right. Now, common shareholders, they can vote. Their number of votes depends upon number of shares they are holding. So what does it mean? It means when common shareholders will vote, common shareholders will vote 3 times. They have 3 votes because they are holding 3 shares. That's normally happen. So if they want to vote to someone to become a chairman, so if you are holding 3 shares, you can give 3 votes 3 times, 1, 2, 3. So maybe you can give 2 votes to this person and 1 vote to this person, or 1 vote to this and 2 to another, right? So idea is that depends upon number of common share you are holding. You are holding 5 shares, you have 5 voting rights. 10 shares, 10 voting rights. 10 voting rights means 10 times you can vote. Maybe you can vote one person 10 times. If you have 10 shares, 10 common shares, you can vote 2 times if you have 2 common shares, right? But preference shares, no matter you are holding 1 preference share, 2 preference share, 3, 10, or 50, you only have 1 voting rights. You can vote only 1 times, not multiple times, unlike common shareholders, right? So that's why preference shareholders, they have 1 voting rights. Understand? 1 voting rights? Yes or no? Okay. Next. So primary claims, and they have voting rights. Next things, remember, preference shareholders, they have a right to be treated as debt holders, right? Preference shareholders, they have rights to be treated as debts shareholders. Debts holders, so not debt shareholders, debt holders. Right? So means they have a right to be treated as debts shareholders. What does it mean, treated as debts shareholder, debts holder? Treated as debts holder means, what is the meaning of debt holders? Debt holders are the people who receive fixed periodic payments, right? And who are the preference shareholders? Preference shareholders are also the people who receive fixed periodic payments, right? So fixed periodic payments, right? So that's the meaning of will be treated as a debt holders. In other words, we can say that debt preference shareholders, also known as preference shares, also known as partially debts. Partially debts. Partially debts means same as a debts but different, right? Means not 100% debts, but like as debts, but not debts, right? Partially debts means like as debts, but not debts. That's the meaning of partially debts, right? That's the ideas behind the rights that preference shareholders they have, right? Now, I want you to, so that's all about rights related to preference shares, right? Next thing we will discuss about the types. So next thing we will discuss about types of preference shareholders. So we study about A, meaning, B, rights, and C, types. All right. Before we move on to types, I want you to explain me, or you can take 5 minutes if you want, 5 or 10 minutes. You can tell me the difference between debts and preference shareholders. All right. I want you to find a difference between debt holders and preference shareholders. Give me at least 4 difference. Give me at least 4 difference between debt holders and preference shareholders. But I want you, please do not Google and find the answers of this. Try to think whatever information I provided to you. Just think about it. Use that information to give me at least 4 difference between debts holder and preference shareholders. All right? Understand? Yes or no? Give me 4 difference, not just only one. 4 difference. Okay, so now we check the difference between debts and the preference shares, right? So the first difference is about primary claims, right? So they have a primary claims, they have a secondary claims. Right? Second difference is a tax advantage, right? They have, company have a tax advantage, no tax advantage, right? Third difference between is voting rights. Again, they have no voting rights, they have voting rights. Next difference is about the decisions. Not really, because preference shareholders, they are not involved in making decisions. Common shareholders, they are involved in making decisions, right? For difference, we cannot say that controller or ownership, preference shareholders are not ownership. Common shareholders has a ownership, right? Risk point of view, risky. They are less risky, less riskier than common shareholders, and they are more riskier than debts, right? So these are the difference between debts holder and the preference shareholders, all right? Now what I want you to, so that's mainly the differences. So now what I want you to find a difference between common shareholders, right? Common shareholders and preference shareholders. Give me 3 or 4 differences. Take 5 or 10 minutes if you want. Okay, so the first difference is claims. Common shareholders, they have a secondary claims, right? Preference shareholders, they have a primary claims. Primary then common, of course. Second is a control. Common shareholders, yes, they control because they involve in operating and financial decisions. Preference shareholders, they have no control. Third difference could be about vote. They have a multiple voting rights and they have a single. No matter how many votes, how many shares you carry, they have. And the fourth difference could be about payments or dividend. Right. Common shareholders, they subject to firm performance, right? And preference shareholders, they have a fixed dividend. fixed dividend. So that's mainly the difference between common shareholders and preferential. Make sure you write down all the differences, because in your exams, I can ask you the difference between common preference, the difference between debts and equity, difference between debts and preferential holders, right? Now, next is, now I want you to find the similarities. Find the similarities between the debt holders and preference shareholders. Can you tell me at least 3 similarities, right? Not difference. You know, similarities, same. Give me 3 reasons which says that both are same, all right? So again, please do not Google, just whatever information I gave you, use that information to find the similarities between debt holders and preference shareholders, right? Just 5 minutes. Okay, so now we check the differences, similarities. So the first is both have no control, all right? None of these have a control over the company, all right? Both have primary claims over or than common shareholders, right? Common shareholders, right? Both have fixed periodic payments. Fixed periodic payment, right? And I think that's the 3 similarities between debt holders and preference shareholders, right? Now, I want you to find the similarities between preference shareholders and common shareholders. Find, just give me at least 3 similarities between common shareholders and preference shareholders. Just 5 minutes. So here we see the first difference is voting rights. Both, they have voting rights. None of these have no tax advantage. None of these has a tax advantage, right? And both have a secondary claims. Secondary claims. Then debt holders. So these are both are riskier in terms of getting payments. Number 4, if you want, you can write. Okay. So like one student, she write, he or she, I don't know. Yeah, I guess he. So that's all about similarities and difference among all these kinds of debt holders. So let's move on to the next, which is the types of preference shares holders. Now the types. Okay, so there are 4 types of preference share holders or preference shares we have. Let's talk about the first one. The first type of preference share is a cumulative preference share. Cumulative preference shares. Cumulative preference shares. Second one is a non-cumulative preference share. Third one is a callable preference share. Sometimes we call it buyback. Buyback. Buyback preference shares. Right. And the fourth is a convertible preference shares. Convertible preference shares. So let's talk about the first one, cumulative preference shares. Cumulative preference shares are those shares in which preference shareholders, they receive dividend together instead of time to time, right? So in cumulative preference shares, preference shareholders, of course, preference shareholders, I'm just writing shareholders. Preference shareholders, they receive dividend together. Then periodically. What does it mean? Normally, whenever company pay dividend, it depends how often company announce dividend. Remember when you watch that cartoon, the video about a listing company in the stock exchange, when the guy he goes to the New York Stock Exchange to list his company, ODM, oil and drum manufacturing, New York Stock Exchange, they have a criteria you have to meet the criteria if you want your company is listed on the stock exchange. So different criteria, such as the annual profit should be more than $3 million or $1 million. And second one is a large distribution of shareholders. And you have one more requirement. The third requirement was periodic reports about company financials, right? Or periodic financial reports. Periodic means quarterly. every quarter, and after 3 months, company announce its profit, right? Company tells the markets or the users that this is the profit, and as per profit, company give dividend. Company give dividend to preference shareholders and common shareholders. Preference shareholders, they receive fixed dividend after every 3 months, and common shareholders, they receive, depends upon the negotiations between the management and the common shareholders. So idea is that shareholders, they receive dividend after 3 months. So if you are holding cumulative preference shares, then instead of receiving dividend after 3 months, you receive dividend together. Together means maybe at the end of the year. So at the end of the year, you're gonna get a dividend for 4 quarters. So instead of giving you dividend time to time, company will give you dividend in total. So that's the meaning of cumulative. Cumulative means total, together, instead of just paying dividend time to time. That's the meaning of cumulative preference shares, right? Non-cumulative preference shares are those shares in which is very general preference shares. So in which shareholders, they receive dividend. So shareholders, of course, preference shareholders, they received dividends periodically. All right. So this is called a non-cumulative preference shares, right? So next is that's called non-cumulative, not together. Right? So next is a callable preference shares and buyback preference shares, or sometimes we call it buyback. Now, what does it mean, buyback? Buyback means company sell you shares, preference shares, company sell you preference shares, you become a preference shareholder. But you're not gonna become a preference shareholders for the whole life of the company. Company is selling you share for a particular time period. When that time period is over, you have to return share backs, or company will buy share back from the preference shareholders, all right? Or company will call them to return share backs to the company, and whatever is a market price, company offer you that market price. That's the meaning of buyback preference shares. So it depends upon how long company is offering or giving that buyback shares to preference shareholders. Not generally, it's for 5 years. But again, it depends upon companies to companies. But on average, if you have a look, majorities of companies, they normally issue buyback shares to preference shareholders for maximum 5 years, right? Now, what does it mean, buyback shares? Buyback shares are those shares in which preference shareholders hold shares for a particular time frame or time period. So once time period over, they return or company buy back from them. They return or company buy shares back from them. So this is called a buyback share. So as I said, they hold share for maximum 5 years. So which means for maximum 5 years, they receive a fixed dividend, right? They receive a fixed dividend. So this is called a callable preference shares or buyback preference shares, right? Let's move on to the convertible preference shares. So convertible preference shares are those preference shares which convert into a common shares after a particular time frame, right? So convertible preference shares are those shares which convert into right after a particular period, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, it depends. So for the 2 to 3 years, you're gonna be a preference shareholders. You're gonna receive a fixed amount of dividend over the period, and you're not involved in any kinds of important decision of the company. All right, and once that uh, period is over, automatically whatever shares you are holding, let's say you are holding a 5 shares, so you're gonna you're gonna transfer, I mean, 5 shares of the common going to transfer to you, and you have to return preference shares back to the company, right? So this is the ideas for a convertible preference shares, convert into a common shares, right? Okay. Now, what is the conclusion here? What we conclude from preference share here? The conclusion is this preference shares sounds like a debts, right? As I said, this is one of the rights of the preference, that they have a right to be treated as a debts, right? If company are treating them as a debts, so why company do not want debts? Why company want preference? Because preference shares are like as debts, right? So in this situation, why company do not want debts? Why company want preference shares? Can you tell me why we have preference shares even they are treated as a debt holders? They are like as debt holders, but still why we have um, preference shares? Tell me, what do you think? Okay, so let me explain you that why company prefer preference over debts. One of the what is the meaning of debts? Meaning of debts means you have to mortgage your assets, right? If you do not mortgage your assets, if company wants a large amount of money to invest, calling shares is faster. Not really, because if of course, compared to common shareholders, the number of preference shares are issued in a market, they are quite small. So it's not appropriate to say that selling preference shares, we can raise large amount of money faster. So one of the main reason is that mortgage. If company is willing not to mortgage its assets, right, then company choose preference shares, right? And company that's one of the major difference. And second thing is that for debts, even though you having a loss, still you have obligations to return interest back to the banks or debt holders. But that's not the case of the preference shareholders. If company having a loss continuously, company less likely to pay dividend to common shareholder, preference shareholder. But even though they have a fixed periodics, but company less likely to pay them a share dividend if company having a loss. Right? So that's mainly, that's why companies sometimes prefer preference shares over the debts. But sometimes companies prefer debt. So now we discuss about the common stocks. So let's talk about common stocks. So you know that common stocks are the stocks which are basically held by the controller of company, controller of the company, of the firm. So in other words, you can say that the people who are holding a common stocks, these people known as a controller of the company. That means they are involved in operating and financial decisions of the company, right? So let's move on to the dividend. So before dividend, let's talk about right. I think we should speak about rights. What rights they have. So because we started rights for common preference shareholders, so now we start with the rights. What rights common shareholders they have? So their rights divided into two parts. One are voting rights, and second one is a primitive right, primitive rights, yes. Primitive rights. Let's discuss about voting rights first. What does it mean, voting rights? You know that they have a rights to vote, right? But in their voting rights means they can vote multiple times, depends on the number of stocks they are holding. As I give example before, if common shareholders are holding 3 stocks, so they will give they have a rights to vote 3 times, depends number of shares they are holding. So first rights, remember the voting rights that I'm going to explain now, these voting rights only common shareholders they have. Preference shareholders, they do not have such rights. Right? So the first one is a proxy. Now, what does it mean, proxy? In simple English, proxy means on behalf of something, right? Or for something, for someone, right? Now, what is proxy means here? Voting rights proxy. It means common shareholders, they have voting rights in form of proxy. What does it mean? For example, let's say I am a common shareholder and I'm holding around 50 shares of the company. And today is a meeting, board of directors meeting. And in this meeting, we gonna select who gonna be a CEO of the company, right? So which means I have to be in the meeting so I can vote. So let's say I have a 50 shares, so I can vote. I can give 50 votes to someone from someone to whom I feel that most deserving candidates for the for the director's position. All right. But unfortunately, today I'm busy or maybe I'm sick. So due to my health issues, I cannot go to company to vote. So in this situation, what I'm going to do, I'm going to write a letter. In that letter, I'm going to nominate someone, another shareholders of the company. I'm nominating that person that all my voting rights will transfer to that person for today's election of chairman. So I'm writing on the letter that I am transferring my voting rights to this particular person. So this particular person can vote on behalf of me. Let's say I am transferring my voting rights to Mr. X, all right? And Mr. X already holding, let's say, 60 shares. So he has 60 shares, I have a 50 shares, but I cannot go to company because of my health issues. So I am transferring my 50 voting rights to that person. So now that person, 60 plus 50, so that person has a 110 votes. So that person has a right to vote 110 times, right? So that's the meaning of proxy. So which means that person can vote on behalf of me. So he can vote to whom whatever he likes, all right? He's not gonna just listen me because I believe that person, that's why I am transferring my votes to that person, or may I already discuss with that person. But the idea is that I have to inform to the company by issuing a letter with my signatures and so on, right? So that's the meaning of proxy. But preference shareholders, they do not have any proxy voting rights. They can't do that. If they are sick, they cannot go to company to vote, so their vote will not be considered. They have to be present in the board meeting to vote that particular person. So that's the ideas for voting rights, right? Proxy voting rights. Second one is a non-voting rights. Non-voting rights means if any common shareholder which is new to company, which recently become a common shareholder of that company, maybe that person will not have right to vote to the director since he has not been connected with company from the long time. So that person may not be able to use his vote in a right way. So he may not able to find who is the most deserving candidates compared to the existing shareholders, compared to the old shareholders. If the shareholders, they have been connected with the company from really long time, that shareholders, they know better than the fresh shareholder who is the most deserving candidates for the position of the director. So in this situation, if any kinds of common shareholder which is new to company, which is fresh to company, so that person may not have a voting rights, may not have right to vote to elect the shareholder. So maybe his voting rights will be distributed among the other common shareholders. So make sure they can use their voting rights better than the person who's a fresh. So because it's a fresh person, so he's not, he won't be able to make a right decision. So which means he's wasting his voting, wasting his votes. So instead of just allow them to give a vote, company will transfer their votes among the other people. So the other people will be able to make a right decisions. Right? So that's the ideas for non-voting rights. Right? So voting rights include proxies and non-voting rights. Right? So next is primitive rights. Now, what does it mean, primitive? Primitive basically protect shareholders from losing. So primitive rights basically protect shares protect existing common shareholders, from reducing their ownership at new issues. Now, what does it mean? It means, the meaning of primitive is, you know, that when companies sell new shares in a market. So for example, now we have 3 common shareholders, right? And whatever profit company make it, company distribute profit among these 3 shareholders, right? That's normally happen. So now, if company sell 2 more shares, so now we have 5 common shareholders. So which means company gonna distribute this profit among 5 shareholders, right? So idea is that if number of common shares are increasing, the ownership of each shareholders may reduce, right? Because controlling power gonna be distributed among all people. So which means your controlling power may reduce, right? That's very general procedure, general practice. But the good thing about primitive rights is, primitive rights basically protect existing shareholders. Protect existing shareholder means they are protecting existing shareholders, that if company will sell new shares, new issues means when company issue new common shares. When company will issue new common share, existing common shareholders control or ownership may not be affected. So they will they have same ownership they had before company sell new issues. So their new issues, their controlling power or their ownership may not be affected, right? So what kind of protections, because primitive shares are giving protection, right? Protection is giving kind of protections, and protect, as I mentioned. So what kind of protections it's giving? So the first protection is a protect from dilution of ownership. Dilution of ownerships. So which means your ownership primitive right from dilution of ownership. So which means it protects from diluting ownership. So it means your ownership will not be diluted. That's primitive rights only common shareholders they have. Right? Second one is it's protect from dilution of earnings, which means your earning may not be affected. Your earning will remain unchanged, same like as previously. Like as before I give example, if number of shares are increasing, company has to distribute profit among shareholders, but company more likely to protect the earning of the existing shareholders at the new issues. The third one is under primitive rights, existing shareholders. Remember all about existing shareholders, right? Existing shareholders. Existing shareholders. So special rights. Special rights. Now, what is special rights? Under special rights, existing shareholders, they have right to buy new share at discounts. Existing shareholders, they have right to buy new common shares at discounts. So which means when company gonna sell a new common share in a market to raise money, if any existing shareholders is willing to buy their share, so company will give them discounts. That's the meaning of special rights they have, all right? But new shareholders or potential shareholders, they're willing to be a shareholders of the company, they will not have that right. They will not get any kinds of discounts, right? Again, these kind of rights may not implement for the preference shareholders as well. So that's maybe the difference between preference and common shareholders is about voting rights, because preference shareholders, they do not have a proxy voting rights. And second one is a preference shareholders, they do not have a primitive rights, right? Only common shareholders, they have primitive rights, right? So this is the ideas behind the rights related to common stocks, right? So let's move on to the next, which is types of common share or the characteristics of common shares. Again, it's number 2. So we are talking about equities. Under equity, we are talking about common share. And under common share, let's discuss about features of common shares or characteristics. Characteristics or features or types of common share, anything you want to call it, right? So the first characteristics they have, they are also first is authorized share. Authorized shares. Now, what does it mean, authorized shares? Authorized shares are those number of shares that companies sell in its whole life, right? It's a number of shares or total number of shares. I should say total number of shares. It's a total number of shares that company sells in its whole life. So company cannot sell more than that in its whole life. So the idea is that whenever you apply for a business license, so you have to provide some memorandum of association, an article of association. Memorandum and article of association is just rule and regulations of the companies. So under that rule of regulation, you have to mention everything. You have to mention that in your whole life, how many number of shares you gonna sell in the markets. So the total number of shares you supposed to sell in the whole life of the companies, that's called the authorized shares. You do not have authority to sell more than that, all right? So, and obviously, from these authorized shares, whenever company needs money, company do not sell shares all together at the same time. Companies sell shares step by step and time to time. If company needs money, company sells some part of shares, because if company will sell all share at the same time, in future, if company need money and company not willing to borrow from bank, company will not have any shares to sell it. So that's why in authorized shares, company sell its some shares time to time. So the idea is that company never ever sell its all share at the same time. Company always try to keep the capitals, keep the shares. So we call it capital reserves or any kind of shares. Next is outstanding shares. Outstanding shares. Now, what is outstanding shares? Outstanding shares are those shares that common shareholders hold, right? Which means company sold in a market to common shareholders, right? Outstanding share means the number of shares that company sold among common shareholders. Among common shareholders. So whatever shares common shareholders are holding, we call it outstanding shares. All right. So, okay. Next is a buyback shares. Buyback shares. So buyback shares are those shares, buyback shares are those shares, or exactly the same like as preference shares. So that company, these are the number of shares that company buy back after a period. Right? After a period. Next one is a uncalled shares. Uncalled shares. Uncalled share exactly opposite of outstanding shares. All right? Now, what's the difference between outstanding and uncalled shares? Okay, what happened? So this is a company, right? Now company sell its shares among shareholders, right? So these are the shareholders. So they hold company shares. And of course, what if they buy shares, what they have to return back to company is a money, right? Company give them shares and they will return money to company. They will give company money and they will get the shares, right? Now, what is the difference between outstanding and uncalled shares? So remember, outstanding shareholders are those shareholders they already paid money to company in exchange of shares, right? And uncalled shares holder are those shareholder from which company hasn't asked money. Company hasn't asked money from these shareholders or these shares. So means they're still pending to pay money to the company. So that's kind of share called uncalled shares, right? So I write uncalled shares are those shares which haven't paid by shareholders. Right? So A, which is this, they already paid money to the company, and uncalled are B, right? Which is B. They haven't paid money back to the company. So that's the difference between uncalled and outstanding. So sometimes we call it called up shares. Sometimes we call it outstanding or called up. So it means company already called them money. Means they have to pay money to the company, but they haven't asked money from these. So whenever company needs money, company will ask in future, and company need. Otherwise, company may not ask. All right. So this is the ideas behind. We have one more. No, I think that's all. So we have 4 types of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have 4 types of common shares, right? So now types of common, you can call it types or you can call it characteristics, whatever you like it, you can call it, right? So before we move on to next, next we're going to discuss about dividend. So before we move on to the dividend, do you have any question? Any questions before we, no questions. So let's move on to the next. Next is types of dividend. Let's move on to the next, the types of dividend. So let's move on to the next, which is the last components or last part for the equity, which is types of dividend, right? So now what does it mean, dividend? You know that. Dividend means profit distribution. Dividend means profit distribution among shareholders, right? And here we are only discussing about common shareholders. So the profit distribution among common shareholders called the dividend. Now, dividend has a different types. I won't call it types. Instead of saying types, I think I should call forms of dividend, right? Form of dividend. So common share dividend could be paid in 3 different forms, right? Could be paid in 3 different forms. So it means we have 3 different forms to paying dividend. First is in form of cash. We call it cash dividend. Cash dividend. Second form is a stock dividend or share dividend. We call it bonus shares. So bonus shares or bonus shares. Bonus share. Bonus share means when company pay dividend in form of shares, not in form of cash. Generally, company pay common shares dividend in form of cash. Commons and preference, both in form of cash. But common, they have another form, which is bonus. Company may not comfortable to pay dividend in form of cash, then company choose second option, which is bonus shares. Third is a inventory dividend in form of inventory. Inventory means in form of its product and services. Instead of paying them dividend, cash or bonus, company will give its product, and product value is equals to the proposed dividend value, right? So let's talk about the cash dividend. So cash dividend means when company transfer money, which is dividend money, company pay in form of cash. Company give cash to their shareholders. This is one of the common, right? This is the common way to pay, not common shareholders. This is a very ordinary way to pay dividend to their shareholders, right? Now, bonus shares. Bonus share means when company pay dividend in form of shares, right? So which means instead of paying cash to their shareholders, company decided to give them share, which value is equals to shares, right? Company generally not prefer this kind of option. Why? Because if company is choosing a bonus share, company may lose its ownership, because as company distributing its common shareholders among the people, company ownership will reduce. So if you are giving them common share as a dividend, so which means you are losing shares. I mean, you are losing control. Company losing its ownership. So company is transferring its ownership to the common shareholders, so other common shareholders, give them more power. You can say that. So that's why company generally do not prefer to bonus shares. But why company do that? If company running out of liquidity, right? If company has any kinds of liquidity issues. Liquidity means cash. So if company has any kinds of cash problems, all right, or company required cash for other investment opportunity, or company required cash to pay for other expenses which are much more important than the shareholders' dividend, and those kind of expenses may not be paid in form of dividend, in form of shares, like as maybe salary of employees, right? Company cannot transfer them shares if company need to pay them salary. Second option is company operating or non-operating expense, like as marketing expense, advertising expense. These kind of expenses, company cannot pay in form of shares, electricity bill, internet bill, or renting, right? So a salary for accountants, salary for human resource, IT managers or store manager, different kind of people's salary. So company cannot pay that kind of expense in form of cash. So company, the company cannot pay those kind of expenses in form of shares. So company use its cash for those expense. So when time to pay dividend to shareholders, company doesn't have cash, so company use shares to give them as a dividend. So this is called them bonus shares, right? Now, inventory. Inventory is one of the a very uncommon way of paying a dividend. Majorities of company may not choose this kinds of way to pay dividend. Why? Because shareholders may not be happy to get its product as a dividend. Product and service. Let me give you example. Uh, the the company name is Wrangler. This company make a chewing gum. Chewing gum. You know chewing gum? Company make chewing gum. I think the brand is double mint or peppermint. I don't know. You know, this is a green color chewing gum. It's world famous brand of chewing gum. They have many products. One of the product is a double mint or peppermint or some kind of mint chewing gum. So what happened with this company? I guess it's 1992 or 1993. At that time, that company was also having some kind of liquidity issues. So instead of paying them a cash dividend or bonus dividend, company gave them a box of chewing gum. Company gave them box of chewing gum which value equals to the dividend. All right. Shareholders may not be really happy, but company didn't have any options. All right, because company gave them a promise to give dividend time to time, but company may not have a cash, or company may not be really comfortable to paying them a bonus shares. So company decided to use its inventory as a uh, um, um, as a dividend, right? There is a one more example about services. In when company use its services in form of dividend, that example is quite weird, but it's a true example. There was a one company about cremations. I mean, we call it funeral ceremonies. So that's England. That company was an England-based company. So there's that company, very well-known companies. They provide a funeral services or whatever services people required at the funeral, kind of any kinds of decorations or any arranging the coffins and vehicles or any kinds of services they required at the funeral. That company, they provide that services. So what company did, when time to pay dividend to their shareholders, instead of paying them dividend, company decided to give them a discounts in their funeral funeral ceremonies. So in that kind of this is quite weird examples. Nobody likes to take that kind of dividend in form of service, but again, same thing. Company didn't have any other options, and company can't say that we cannot pay you dividend, right? So that's why company offered them a free funeral services, or if any family member, unfortunately, if any family member die in your families or in shareholders family, company will give them discounts, right? So that's really weird example, but that's true. Maybe you can Google, I don't remember the name of companies, but you can Google to find the name of that company. So that's quite strange. So the idea is that company find another way to pay off its people or pay off its dividend. All right. So this is the ideas behind a common shareholders, the types of dividend. I remember one more examples about with this company, but that example is not really about the dividend, but that example about payments to their people in form of product and service. What happened, it's very old example. I don't exactly remember the name of company, but that company wasn't really famous, but that company produced a chili sauce or fish sauce. What that company decided to do, when it's time to pay dividend, no, not dividend, you know that in the beginning of the year or at the end of Lunar New Year, uh, at the end of the year, we have a Lunar New Year festival in Vietnam. So what that company did, and company has to give a 1 month bonus to their employees. So instead of paying them bonus in form of cash, unfortunately, company was running out of uh, cash. So instead of paying cash, company decided to pay them bonus in form of box of chili sauce, right? And the value of that box of chili sauce was equals to the bonus that company is supposed to pay them in form of cash, all right? So this is the ideas that company choose different way to pay off to their employees or to pay off to their stakeholders, not in form of cash, but in other forms. Other forms is a product and services. All right. So that's all about a common shareholders form of dividend. Right. So equity is finished. Right. So now we stop here, but topic 4 hasn't finished yet. So in the next session, so next week, Monday afternoon, we will continue with this topic 4. All right. So, and I will upload this video on YouTube, and you can watch it later if you want to watch it. All right. And one more thing, from next week, I'm busy on Wednesday afternoon. All right. So which means we will back to the schedule what we have, whatever we have decided before. So which means next week I will teach you online Monday afternoon and the Friday afternoon, not Wednesday. Like as today I'm teaching you Wednesday because next week I'm busy on Wednesday, right? Everybody understand? So next week I will see you on Monday afternoon. So we will finish hopefully this topic 4 next week Monday. So anybody has any question regarding topic 4? So in topic 4, we find the difference between debts and equity. Then we study about equity, which means we study about the preference shares, its types, its rights, its meaning, and then equity rights, which is primitive and voting rights, and then equity characteristics and types, and third is equity types of dividend. Right. So equity is finished. So next class we will discuss about issuing common stocks. What is the procedure to issue common stocks among people, right? What are the ways we have? So same like as underwritings and eligible investors and private placements, the same thing that we studied before, but this time we will study much more in detail, all right? So if no questions, then we stop here. So I'll see you next week, next week, Monday afternoon, right, 1 p.m. So I will upload this one hopefully today or tomorrow. Then I will send you a link, and then you can watch this video again. If you have anything that you did not understand, and send me email. All right. So we stop here. I'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.